we're not just trying to teach people to remember things. We're
Mhm.
trying to work together as a group of scholars in that class to learn how to think. And I say that specifically uh, to include myself in that I see going into the classroom with master's students, with undergrads, with doctoral students, whoever it is that I'm working with, as an opportunity for me to re-engage and to consider how I'm thinking as well, so that we're constantly growing in that area. And that's something that doesn't happen alone.
Is seminary worth it? With limited time and resources, you might be wondering if theological education is worth the investment. Here to talk to us about that is Dr. Jonathan Arnold. Dr. Arnold is Associate Professor of Church History and Historical Theology, as well as Director of Research Doctoral Studies. Dr. Arnold, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
You know, there's a perennial question that we seminary professors hear, and that is generally, is seminary worth it? Is the investment of theological education worth it? And when you think about so much to be done in around the world in our own communities, so often students feel this tension, and it's a good tension. They're ready to get to work. They're ready to do the stuff of the kingdom, but they question, is theological education really worth that investment? What would you say to that kind of student?
Well, first of all, I'd say it is a great question. I'm glad that they have it. I'm glad that this generation, especially, is wanting to get out and do things and wants to see change being made. That's a great thing, and that's something we want to, as seminary professors, we want to pour into and even help develop. But the other side of that is there's clearly a calling in Scripture for us to grow and to mature and to develop in our abilities, in our talents, in our giftings, as well as in our leadership development areas. And so being able to grow and to take some time that is intentionally focused on laying a solid foundation is something that has largely been gifted to this generation, especially in the United States and in a place in the West where we have such wealth, both of time as well as finances, resources that are available to us that have never been available to the church before, that really gives us an opportunity to lay a much deeper foundation that will make the later actual deployment of mission work much more fruitful. And so I would argue that for those students who are really excited about getting out and going without spending time laying that foundation, they're going to find that they would be much better served if they would be able to spend some time developing themselves, developing their knowledge, and being able to lay a foundation for that work later on.
But does it delay ministry? Does it put off the work of ministry, 3, 4, sometimes 5 years, so that a student who does feel that tension of wanting to be involved in ministry has this sense of, why would I take 3 to 5 years out of my life now when I'm young, when I have energy, and why would I spend that in the classroom? Doesn't that just put me behind?
Sure. No, this is very much the question that faces everyone that's going into higher education. Do we have time to spend 3 years on a master's degree? Do we have time to spend 7 or 8 years to get a doctorate? And certainly there are pros and cons to all of those things that have to be weighed out. But the easy answer is no, it doesn't delay ministry at all. It just changes the context in which the ministry is being done. Certainly, students should not be putting off doing ministry simply because they are students first and foremost. They should be able to love their neighbor well. They should be able to pour into their community. They should be able to pour into their church, and to do that in a way that is appropriate for the time and the resources that they have available to them at the moment. That being said, that's sort of a bumper sticker answer, and I don't want to stick with just the bumper sticker, because there is a sense in which if you are focused on developing, you aren't as focused on pouring out. And so there is, I think, a good way of looking at seminary or any other kind of developmental season in your life where you are actually saying, I'm holding off on some of the ministry that I'm called to do for now for the sake of a later 2-year fruitful period. So I think there is a way of looking at it and saying, yes, there is a time where this is going to be delayed, where I'm not going to be as focused on ministry, or I'm not going to be as focused on pouring out in the moment. But even that gives us an opportunity to develop patience and perseverance that will pay off in greater detail much later on in ministry. And most of the seminary professors that we have here have been in full-time vocational ministry at some point in their time. I have, and I can tell you that the amount of time spent in preparing, just being able to hold off and focus on studying, focus on developing firm roots, really pays dividends later in ministry. And I would never have changed it for myself. And all of the professors and pastors that I know that have been able to take that time, 3, 4 years, 5 years, whatever it looked like, they've not regretted that.
You know, we talk a lot about the different degrees that we have here at Southwestern Seminary, and we have really any degree that might fit your ministry goal or your calling. One particular degree, though, that we emphasize is the Master of Divinity. That's the one I did. I have a lot of friends who did it. It is a hefty degree, though, and I have seen so many people get almost like a class credit sticker shock. They look at all of the classes that you have to do, and they say, "Are you kidding me? This is going to take forever." And they look at other degrees. Now, these other degrees that we have, every degree we have at Southwestern is excellent. It just depends on the ministry goal and calling that you have. But what would you say to someone who is in between? Maybe they're okay with seminary, maybe they're on board with that, but they're looking at maybe the MTS, the 36-hour MTS. Also a great degree, depending on your life situation, but they're intimidated by that MDiv. And they're intimidated by that MDiv because they say, why can't I just get the piece of paper and the preparation and not have to do the full-blown Master of Divinity? What would you say to that type of student?
Yeah, I completely understand. If only they knew the conversations that went on behind the scenes of everybody asking for, let's just put more hours in there, because there's more things that we want to be able to teach, and more things we want to help students prepare for. We'd end up with, a 400-hour degree if everybody got their druthers on those. So I think that there's some of that. I would want the student and the student in my own church who was thinking about going on to seminary and comparing those degrees. I'd want to be able to sit down with them and point out the difference in those degrees and note the context of the classes that are being offered and why they're being included in that MDiv degree. There's a reason that we've packaged those programs together the way that we have. And that comes from years and generations. It's not just the people on Seminary Hill right now. It's people from generations ago who have noted what is actually required in the ministry, what's going to benefit these students when they're done, when they've graduated and have gone on and they're spending their lives, pouring their lives out, spending 80, 100-hour weeks in caring for small congregations out in the middle of nowhere or in large cities where they feel very much alone. And we know what it's like to be in that situation and what kind of courses and what kind of information is going to be required in those dark days. And even in the great days when there's a whole lot of things to celebrate and when you have a lot of friends in ministry and things are going well, we also know the types of information and the types of study that are required to be able to prolong those as well. And so this is generations of wisdom that's going into this, well, we can package together, even if it looks like a lot, we can package together in such a way that over the course of a 3 to 4 year degree, you can really build a very broad but still deep foundation that's going to pay off in the long term. That doesn't mean it's for everybody. Like you said, our other degrees are great, and we put all that wisdom into those as well. But that MDiv that is still the bread and butter of what we do here is very much designed to really be practical for the individual in ministry, so that they have all of that foundational work that's necessary and can continue to build on it over the years to come.
Yeah, it is in part, it's so hefty because it is so broad and so broadly preparatory. We live, Dr. Arnold, we live in an age where you can find anything on Google. You can find all the resources that you can imagine for free online. And we also live in a culture that is highly individualistic. And I think when you combine those two together, there's a tendency among a prospective theological student who might say, why would I need to go to seminary when I can just do my own reading? I can do my own study. I can put myself through the rigors of self-discipline, of reading all on my own. And that's incredibly admirable. And there are so many who do that. But what's the benefit of enrolling in a program with professors and a full degree and at an accredited institution? What would be the reason? What's that number one driving motivator to move from individual study to community preparation?
Oh, it's such a difficult question, especially in, like you said, in our culture where we are so individualized, and we do have so many resources available to us. And we also have examples of great pastors, both contemporary and historical, who have been able to do incredible ministry without the benefit of seminary. And so it's not that it's the end all be all. It's not that seminary is the only way to go. But I would say that there is something more to what's going on at seminary than simply the inculcation of knowledge. We're not just giving a database. We're not just developing an encyclopedia of information for students to have. Because like you said, you can leave here and look up on your phone much faster than you're going to be able to recall dates and facts and figures of any sort of thing, whether it's a theological problem or a historical date, whatever that looks like. You have a much more access now than ever in history. So I think what the student needs to look at, and what really the church as a whole, and especially Southern Baptist churches that we serve so focused in such a focused manner, is to consider what's going on beyond just the knowledge. And so one of the things that I try to do in my classes, and I know my colleagues do as well, I've heard great stories about your classes in this area as well, is we're not just trying to teach people to remember things. We're
Mhm.
trying to work together as a group of scholars in that class to learn how to think. And I say that specifically uh, to include myself in that I see going into the classroom with master's students, with undergrads, with doctoral students, whoever it is that I'm working with, as an opportunity for me to re-engage and to consider how I'm thinking as well, so that we're constantly growing in that area. And that's something that doesn't happen alone. It doesn't happen with just your phone and Google. It doesn't happen just with you reading books on your own. No matter how great that can be, you don't get that communal development. That's something that I really think the evangelical community as a whole, certainly my own background in Baptist and Bible churches has played this out or borne this out, that there is this tendency to just see yourself as the only authority that's necessary, and to not then grow as a community of believers. And that's something that can be not only done in the seminary classroom in a unique way, but it can also be modeled and become part of the ministry of those students when they leave, so that they can go back and duplicate that in their church, in their vocational ministry, in their counseling ministry, whatever it is that they're doing after they leave here. They're able to duplicate that. And so what we end up with, if we do this well as a group of scholars, as a group of students who are going to be lifelong learners, we end up developing a generation that is able to think biblically and theologically about the culture around them, not just able to recall facts and figures and various bits of information.
That's so good because it really is kind of this focused, intense season of life in which you are essentially developing not only how to think, but I compare it to in my music major days ear training, where you're learning what to listen for, because it's impossible to take every class that you could possibly need theologically for ministry it's impossible to impart all of that. But what we can do is help a student grow in such a way that they are learning how to think, how to discern, what to listen for, so that 20 years down the line, when there's something that we haven't talked about in a class, but they have essentially trained their ears to hear what they should be listening for. What would you say, Dr. Arnold, to someone who looks at doctrines like the Trinity, the atonement, the doctrine of the Holy Spirit, and then on the other side sees the most pressing, urgent needs in the church today, in our culture today, and believes that there's some type of disconnect, almost like, what does theology have to do with the world that I'm living in right now? How would you counsel that type of student?
Well, that's hitting right up my alley in historical theology and church history. I know your area of expertise as well, and so we see that one of the ways that students can deal with that, and one of the ways that the church, I would hope, would deal with that, is really to pour into the history of the church itself, and to understand how God has continued to work in and through His people over the last 2 millennia since the closing of the canon, and recognizing that the church is not in a unique situation today. One of the problems that we have, and this is another one of those reasons why I think seminary is so important, and why that time of focused development is so important, is we can get away from that very narcissistic and myopic view of our own time and of our own culture, thinking that either we've got it somehow all figured out now, or that we are facing some sort of unique problems that the church has never faced before. Certainly there are changes, there are uniquenesses. The church has never had the technology, all that kind of stuff. But in reality, when we look at where the church has come from over the last 2,000 years, where they've been, and how God has worked through His people all the way through, back from the beginning of time, we find that truly there's nothing new under the sun. And if we'll be good students, both of the wisdom that has been passed on from generation to generation, as well as of the circumstances that have developed in those conversations, I think we'll find time and time again, and I have yet to find a place where this doesn't bear out, I think we'll find that the church has spoken to these issues in the past, that God has worked in and through His people in, if not the exact same situation, in something so close that we're able to learn from those. There's an old saying that we are not giants ourselves that in our current contemporary situation, but we are dwarfs on the shoulders of giants that have come before us. I think that's very much the case. What we need to do is see ourselves as dwarfs on the shoulders of giants. And in order to understand what we see so far out, we need to understand how we've gotten to where we are.
We all want to lead a significant life and leave behind something that is of great value, not only for this life, but in eternity. Does scholarship, does poring over books and late nights writing papers, how does that fit? Does it fit in something that is a worthy investment for eternal purposes?
Yeah. So one of the ways I think we have to understand the entire role of higher education, the entire role of the academy and scholarship, is to be good students of ourselves and to recognize that God has created each of us uniquely, and certainly has created different types of people to be able to glorify Him differently. For those that are academically minded, for those that are focused on scholarship and that know themselves well and know that they're the kind of people that can't leave any stone unturned. They can't come across a passage in Scripture that doesn't quite make sense. They can't just leave it and read over it, or they can't come across a question about history and not go look it up. Those kinds of people, and there's a whole host of them that would fit into this category. For those kind of people, I would argue, not only is scholarship a possible way that you can glorify God, I would argue that it is one of the most important ways that you can. And to recognize yourself, to be a good student of your own personality and of your own giftings, and to understand that that God has created you to do those things. And if you don't do them, then you're wasting the gifts and talents that He's given. Now, that doesn't fit for everybody, and that's a great thing. There are people that are gifted at, well, you mentioned your own musical background. I am tone deaf and couldn't carry a tune in a bucket if I wanted to. I'm not called to glorify God with singing anywhere other than maybe alone in the shower or something of that sort. Like, that's not what I'm called to do. But there are people who are musically gifted that are called to do that and need to be able to glorify God in that way. In the same way, there are those who are called to spend their lives doing deep research and doing intense scholarship. And if they weren't to do that, they would actually be, I think, neglecting the gifts that God has given them. What's beautiful about the body of Christ is that God has given all kinds to the body. And so there are those that are going to be able to do that. And there are those that are going to have the resources and the time and the ability to spend in luxury, which is, studying and writing for the church. There are those that won't have those opportunities either in the skill set or in the finances or other aspects of luxury that would allow them to do that. And that's okay too. And they need to be pouring out their life the way that God has created them. But absolutely, scholarship is one way that we're able to pass on the wisdom of the generations, to take the faith that has once for all been delivered to the saints and to pass it on to the next generation, just as we're called to do.
Dr. Arnold, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And thank you, as always, to our viewers. For more information about Southwestern Seminary, please visit us at swbts.edu. We're also on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Plus, you are just in time to register for spring 2021 classes. You can do any amount that you wish, a full degree, a couple classes here and there. We even have 8-week modules fully online. Whatever you can do, we can do too. This is Ministry Now. Until next time, live your calling.